and thank you for joining us today. I'm Erica Richter. I'm the Senior Director of Communications at ASTA, and I will be facilitating today's discussion. Before we get started, though, I would like to invite you to participate in our Q&A at the end of this discussion. So in order to do that, we would like for you to enable comments on the back end of StreamYard, and it's really easy. It takes about 30 seconds. All you have to do is go to StreamYard.com. It's right there in the comments, and follow the instructions. And that just optimizes the visual experience for everyone during the Q&A segment. And we want to be able to see your names and faces on our end when you ask all those great questions. And for those of you who are joining us right now, please let us know in the comments section where you're viewing from and what ASTA chapter you belong to. And for our ASTA team that's listening in, please introduce yourselves on the comment thread. For those of you who are catching this as a replay, you can always email us anytime at membership@asta.org, and our team will be happy to assist you. And we have a lot of ground to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and get started and welcome Zane Kerby and Eben Peck. Hi, how are you?
Hey, Erica.
Hey, Erica.
Good to see you. Well, we've got a lot of ground to cover, as I said, and I wanted to just start this conversation by looking back at this time last year and giving our audience a sort of behind the scene look at just how quickly this crisis evolved within our own advocacy community. So Zane, starting with you, and then Eben, you can fill in after. What memories stick out most to you from the early days of the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Erica, and it's great to be with you and Eben in this format on Facebook Live. And I want to welcome everyone who's watching or who will watch this later. Last year, ASTA held our legislative day in February, right after the Super Bowl, the day after the Super Bowl here in Washington D.C., where we welcomed about 150 of our members. One of the main concerns that we brought up to legislators on that day, February 7th or 8th, I'm not sure exactly the day, was the looming Real ID crisis that had a sort of a October deadline. So I remember bumping into Roger Block and David Harris in the lobby of our host hotel, and they were watching a television that was showing the Chinese government setting up new hospitals at a breakneck speed. And they asked me in the hallway there, should we be talking to anyone about this? At the time, we just sort of shrugged our shoulders. We had other issues, and it hadn't quite yet exploded. But the next morning, we were having breakfast with Senators Blunt and Collins, and the big news of that day was impeachment. But the senators excused themselves from breakfast to go to a coronavirus briefing. I think Senator Blunt called it a different word. He didn't even know what it was at the time. So from fast forward just a few weeks later, March 12th, actually, Eben and Genevieve and I were seated behind Jay Allenby as he testified before the Small Business Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives. And just again, 4 weeks later, Jay told them about COVID's impact and implored them to act. So February, we were talking about Real ID, and by March, we were fighting for survival. I spoke with Bob Summers, Delta Airlines SVP, earlier this morning, and he mentioned that in February of last year, they handed out $1.6 billion in profit sharing to employees, and by March, they were losing $100 million a day. So that speed with which the pandemic just sort of decimated our business was breathtaking, and it gives you a kind of a sense of the timeline.
Eben, what about you? What are your first memories from this time last year?
First of all, happy to be here. Great to virtually see everybody. Welcome ASTA members, welcome potential ASTA members. Zane, the senator, called it the Cordova virus back then on February 4th. I remember that well, so we didn't even know what to call it at that time. And yes, there's nothing I would rather be talking about on Capitol Hill right now than the Real ID deadline, which was important at the time, but has been sort of dwarfed in importance. So a couple moments jump out to me from about a year ago. One was on March 2nd. It was kind of business as usual for us. I was in Annapolis, capital of Maryland, with Jay Allenby and Alvin Adriano, and we were testifying against a proposed sales tax on services extension to travel agency services. there had to be 800 people in the room. I mean, social distancing was not a thing yet. And I remember at that time having breakfast with Jay beforehand, and him saying, I was asking him, how bad is this? Is this as bad as SARS? Is this as bad as 9/11? And at the time, we kind of agreed that this was worse than SARS, but not as bad as 9/11 in terms of the impact on our industry. And of course, that changed pretty dramatically. So fast forward a few days to March 10th, as Zane said, Jay testified, the House Small Business Committee. This is really at the front edge of this crisis. We were on a call actually today with one of the staffers on that committee, and he said that was kind of the first congressional hearing about it. So we were there. The only thing I remember from that day was that was the first time that I reached out to shake a member of Congress's hand, and she gave me the elbow instead. So we went from being in a hearing room in Annapolis with 800 people to all of a sudden now we're seeing elbow bumps, and it's the first congressional hearing.
It certainly did happen fast on the communications front as well. I remember those calls coming in those early days, and it all happened at breakneck speed. And looking back, 2020 was the most active advocacy year on record for ASTA, I think it's safe to say. And our industry stepped up in a big way, and travel advisors everywhere jumped in and took action with us. So starting with you, Zane, what were the most significant accomplishments of ASTA's advocacy efforts last year in 2020?
Eben can talk about, very eloquently, and I'm sure he will talk about some of the advocacy wins within the CARES Act and then subsequent relief that we got. But I think that, to me, what the pandemic, maybe the most important thing that the pandemic did was expose the inequities in our business. And it was important for ASTA to point them out and suggest policy changes that could make life better for our members. One example is payment timing or compensation timing. Our members do a lot of work up front, and that they normally get paid for months. So in normal times that worked, relatively well, but the pandemic revealed that in hard times it didn't work at all. So last year we called on industry suppliers who were also hurting badly themselves to work towards a fix, to make payment timing closer to the time of full payment rather than the time of travel. I think it's a really important aspect of the work that we do is to stand up on behalf of the entire industry. We have travel advisors everywhere to talk to and to represent us within the industry. As an aside, we asked legislators on our Zoom calls over the last year how long they could get their 20-something staffers to work without paying them. And I think that question caused them to think. Another important thing that we did was kind of unearth or reveal the risks that we were living with that we hadn't paid much attention to previously. When anxious consumers requested refunds directly to their credit card companies for flights that they were no longer going to take, they didn't know that they were creating a liability for their travel advisor. So then when foreign flag carriers started marking those transactions as fraudulent, that action put travel advisors on the hook for the full price of the ticket that they had sold. So ASTA talked to all the carriers. We had very, very strong conversations with them individually. Then we went to ARC's Mike Primo and Lori Reiches, and they told us that ARC would not hold travel advisors responsible for COVID-related cancellations. So again, a really important point in which ASTA stood up and talked on behalf of all travel advisors to other industry segments. Kind of finally in August, a full 5 months after the CDC issued its no sale order, the CDC took out a full-page ad of advertising, urging consumers not to go on a cruise. Doesn't that boggle the mind? Through ASTA, our industry pushed back on this demonization of cruising, first through direct letters to the CDC and in op-ed pieces, and then through more direct channels by threatening legal action. So, ASTA does a lot of work the work that we do is in terms of gathering our voice and then speaking forcefully on behalf of travel advisors everywhere. I think that's probably the most important thing that we did last year. And again, some of the pandemic just revealed some of these inequities that we were able to address as a body together.
Yeah, so that's a lot of ground that we covered in 2020, and there's still more to cover. Eben, what would you say were the most significant advocacy accomplishments from last year?
Well, we really packed about 5 or 10 years worth of advocacy into 1 year. I'm not exaggerating there. So we did a count between when the pandemic hit and the end of the year. We did over 150 congressional meetings, calls, Zooms, mostly Zooms nowadays. Whenever possible, we brought on ASTA members as constituents and as sort of to be able to testify to the impact of COVID on their businesses, which is extremely helpful. 14 separate federal and state grassroots campaigns on different elements of whether it's the CDC no sale order, whether it's the various relief bills that we're going through. Over 25,000 people send 106,000 advocacy messages. That's emails and phone calls in 1 year. The previous record was, if anybody remembers, California AB 5, about independent contractors in 2019, which was 2,900 messages. So this is by orders of magnitude bigger than anything we've ever done before. And it's important to remember none of this is perfect in terms of how the federal government responded, but the kind of things that we were able to accomplish on behalf of our members include the CARES Act. We were pushing for what became the PPP program. We were pushing for loans and forgivable grants, forgivable loans, unemployment assistance extended to independent contractors for the first time. That was something we were very proud of. We have a lot of independent contractor members in our network. Expanding funding for the existing SBA Emergency Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, EIDL, which was designed for hurricanes and tornadoes, and Congress opened it up basically to everybody. And then there was a gap between the CARES Act in March, which happened very fast, over a period of about a week and a half. Congress put together a $2.2 trillion bill, which was at the time the biggest piece of legislation the U.S. Congress had ever passed. And then there was a lot of bickering. There was an election. A lot of time passed. Very frustrating summer. But there was a year-end package as well, which we had heavily engaged on, and that includes the second round of PPP expansion and extension of the Employee Retention Tax Credit, and an extension of those to contractors. And last but not least, there's a really wonky labor issue that we've been working on since 2016 called Department of Labor Blacklist. Basically, has to do with overtime rules. Travel agencies were put on a list saying essentially we couldn't take advantage of an existing exemption. And in May of 2020, we can really celebrate during the middle of a pandemic. The Department of Labor did what we have been pushing for almost 4 years. So we're proud of that as well.
So much that we did in 2020. It's when looking back, it's just incredible how much we accomplished together with the help of our members. And we're only 2 months into 2021, and already the pace is looking a lot like it did last year in 2020. So far this year, over the past 2 months, what have we done so far on the advocacy front? And what are we working on right now to help travel advisors everywhere? So Zane, I'll start with you.
Yeah, Erica. So, if you can believe it, we're actually trying to think a little ahead of the game here and try to help our members not only through this pandemic, but think and plan for future challenges like we're facing right now. And so, one of the subtle changes that we've made in our messaging is to try to help the government understand that those who they have tasked with public health at the CDC and other places who are making these pronouncements like about travel and sort of having a negative effect on travel, they need to take responsibility for that. So the reality is that if the government is going to kind of shut the door on travel or make it impossible for people to travel or put up enormous barriers for people to travel, well, then the government needs to support travel-reliant businesses, specifically businesses like ours, until such time that they can rescind those orders and normal travel patterns can reemerge. So that's a subtle part of the messaging that we have started to put out there. The other thing that we want to do is make sure that consumers are on our side. and that they understand the trouble and the challenge that our industry is facing. So, we poll consumers every 2 weeks with the Back to Normal barometer. And one of the things that we asked this last time out is, hey, consumers, do you realize what the government has done to travel? And do you think it should be doing more to support travel-reliant businesses? And like a huge majority of consumers said, yes. Yeah, we realize that the government, when they shut things down, they need to provide relief until they can open it back up again. So we're going to be taking that message, into back to Congress very forcefully, and also, in some advertising campaigns to try to influence these legislators and staff members, because that's an important part of what we do. So, mainly it's the message, and then it's also obviously applying direct pressure to the CDC to try to help them to clearly define and communicate the safe travel protocols, because the reality is we can't just live forever hunkered down in our homes. It's just not feasible.
Mm. What about you, Eben? You're working behind the scenes with Genevieve and with Lou and our outside lobbying team. So what have we been working on? We can go into the details. We can go into the weeds just a little bit so our members understand what we're doing right now and what's ahead.
Yeah, I'm lucky to work as part of a really fantastic team on the ASTA staff. Zane is a great leader, always so supportive of the advocacy efforts. Genevieve Strand, Lou Altobelli, Peter Labasso, Mark Meter. So it's really all hands on deck situation, especially right now. Everybody is pitching in. I want to make a point too, that yes, we have been working very hard over the past 12 months, but the member engagement is just so critical. We've started bringing constituents onto these congressional calls basically as much as humanly possible. And I can't even tell you the difference in the tone of the conversation when we're talking, as advocacy professionals. But we have a constituent, small businesswoman, small businessman, who's talking about the human impact. I saw a comment from Rob Hale from Colorado. Rob was on a call with us this very morning with his new senator from Colorado. So thank you for those of you who have pitched in. Obviously it's important to email and make phone calls as well, but we would love to involve you in some of these efforts at the same time too. This year it's been crazy, just like last year. We thought we might get a break, but certainly didn't. So the CDC put in new rules related to returning from overseas. You have to present a negative COVID test. That caused a lot of consternation and a lot of questions about how that would be implemented. We expressed our concern to the CDC, as we are not afraid to do. CDC was also talking about implementing a similar requirement for domestic flights, and we pushed back against that as well, joined with a large coalition of 22 other travel industry organizations, and they backed off a little bit at the end of last week. Can't say they backed off for good, but that's at least something positive coming out of all this. And then, of course, Congress is, after spending 8 months of bickering and finger pointing between the CARES Act and the year-end package, they are almost immediately doing another bill, and this is President Biden's top priority. They're moving really fast, so we are trying to max out relief for our members, whether that's grants, whether that's forgivable loans, whether that's another round of PPP, whether that's an extension of the employee retention tax credit. We know firsthand from talking to you all that the tunnel is pretty long for us, perhaps longer than even other parts of the travel industry, based on what Zane was talking about in terms of the commission payment schedules. So we're mindful of that. That's our talking point number one when we're talking to Capitol Hill. So we're kind of in the middle of this process now. I don't have too much to update on, but rest assured we are spending every waking moment trying to get as much relief as possible for our members.
And what's a good way for travel advisors to help us in this effort? What are some of the best ways that our community can help us advocate for our industry in the next round of relief and moving forward? I have some thoughts on that from the consumer media side of things, but I'll let you two fill in the gaps there. What can we do to include our travel advisor community in this effort?
Evan, you mind if I take this first? I guess the first thing I'd say is to realize that there is no you and us. There is only us. ASTA is the nerve center that feels and responds to pain that our industry is feeling. And again, we are only strong. We're stronger and stronger the more of us who've decided to join ASTA and be together. So the reality is that if you don't join ASTA and if you're not engaged with us, then you're really making us less able to deal with the world, the very complicated and challenging landscape that we find in front of us. So the first thing I'd do is join. The second thing I'd say is, Eben mentioned the tremendous work that our members responded to last year by getting involved in all these grassroots campaigns. It does make a difference. It makes a huge difference when you call your member of Congress, or when you sit on a Zoom call with us and you talk to them about your business. It's not only a different tone. It's just you are that mechanism for their feedback, and they don't have any other mechanisms. You are their constituents. So it's so important for you to get engaged, pick up the phone, call your member of Congress, help them understand, and you have to educate them on what kind of challenges and or what kind of consequences that the policy decisions that they're making are having. And if they don't hear anything, then they assume everything is fine. So that's why I think it's really important to first be a member and then obviously get engaged.
We're getting a lot of comments about Legislative Day, Eben, so I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to put a finer point on what Zane said, which is very important to keep in mind. Like, Congress is not like a university, right? They don't do a fact-finding mission on, for example, who's been hit the hardest by the coronavirus and apply objective tests. They respond to people that are in their face, frankly. And our part of the travel industry is smaller than other parts of the travel industry. So it's absolutely critical that we get our voice across, because I used to work up there, and it was, if nobody was complaining about something in my face, then it was not an issue, because if no one can take the time to come and complain about it, then it must not be a big deal. So really important to have this collective action. Legislative Day, absolutely critical part of the whole program. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with ASTA, even engaging in advocacy efforts, from just sending an email to making a phone call to joining one of our calls as well. But kind of the centerpiece of a typical advocacy year is our Legislative Day, which is called, in DC, we call it a fly-in. When you fly in and we walk Capitol Hill and you meet with your members of Congress and their staff in person. And then you develop a relationship, start a relationship, perhaps maintain a relationship with congressional staff. So if something comes up, again, I'm talking about normal times. If something comes up, you have somebody that you met with that year that you can call on, and you're not a stranger. So under Zane's leadership, we restarted this tradition in 2014 with 35 hardy souls. And last year, which is right before COVID hit us, we did have, I think we had over 200 people come. And it's really eye-opening experience for those who haven't done it before. I've been walking with groups and I say, hey, look, there's an airline lobbyist. Hey, look, there's a hotel lobbyist. Like, this is a manifestation of our presence. We are there on Capitol Hill. We're talking to our policymakers directly. So obviously, COVID and other events have created a lot of uncertainty with a large in-person event like this. So we are facing uncertainty this year with regard to the hotel situation in DC, with regard to public access to the Capitol complex. But we are going to do it. We are going to try to do it in May 18th and 19th, asta.org/LegDay. I think the most likely format will be, we will be together. We will do a mix of speakers and panels, and then blocks of time for folks to do virtual calls from the hotel to their members of Congress. Now, we'll look into workarounds. We've heard rumors that congressional staff is willing to go out and meet in a coffee shop, that sort of thing. We'll try to work those angles as well. But this year, I think more important than ever for folks to be here, because this bill that we're talking about right now is going to pass quickly. We've been told 6 times this week there's another one coming. This is not going to finish the job. COVID has just had too much of an impact on the entire economy. So yes, please join us, asta.org/LegDay. Ledge Day, May 18th and 19th here in DC. And I will add one more way for folks to get engaged. Zane mentioned our grassroots portals live on asta.org/advocacy. That's where you go. We have 3 or 4 campaigns running right now, I want to say. And we also have a PAC as well, a political action committee. We've had it since 1979. This is a separate fund made up of voluntary member donations. If you are a member, I encourage you to consider giving to the PAC. That's an extremely powerful tool that we use to get your voice to Capitol Hill. We have a PAC committee that's co-chaired by Jennifer Wilson-Buttigieg and Chris Settlemyre. I saw Chris in the comments there. They do a tremendous job running our fundraising campaigns, but that's a really important program. And if you're a member, you should really join first if you're not a member. If you're a member, please consider donating to ASTA PAC.
Great. And before we get into some of the questions, so as we're getting ready to answer questions, I'm seeing some of them come through. So maybe Michelle, you can switch the format so that people can see my face in the great, thanks. So first of all, if you have questions, type them in the comments. We're going to move into the question segment here in a minute. But just to kind of dovetail off of some of the things that you and Zane talked about, we actually received some research results last Friday. I think it was last Friday, Zane, that we got those research results. And I think it's important that we talk about what we learned from consumers and how consumers feel about how our industry has been impacted. So we have some of those results. Let's start talking about them. Zane, what did we learn?
Yeah, I mentioned it briefly before, but so many consumers also understand the plight that our industry specifically is in, and they agree that the government needs to do more to support small travel reliant businesses. I think that's the takeaway, and we're going to make sure that lawmakers know that it's not just the 140,000 travel advisors who rely on travel in our industry in this country, but consumers realize there's a basic inequity, and that lawmakers have a moral responsibility to take that responsibility and provide relief to businesses that they have, for all intents and purposes, dramatically affected through their government action. So I think that's the main thing that we took away from the research. The other things that are important that were there were that all the good numbers that we want to know, we're heading in the right direction. The number of people who are willing to travel right now, the number of people who are willing to go on a cruise, willing to stay in a hotel room and get on an airplane, all those numbers are going up. And all the people who have reservations, those numbers are going down. So as the infection rate goes down and as the vaccination rate goes up, it will unleash a tremendous amount of pent-up demand with consumers. We have seen that, and those numbers, the right numbers for us, climb week after week after week. And that's why we should be really bullish and really excited about how travel is going to come back.
Yep. You'll see some of the stats that we put below, and these are some of the stats that we're going to be sharing with lawmakers too, to let them know that the travelers are on our side. And from a communications perspective, if you're not a member of the ASTA Lounge, it's our private Facebook group for members only, please join us, because I'll be doing some trainings on how to engage with your local media. That's a really important part of advocacy too. In addition to the phone calls and the emails to your legislators, there's a way that we can also tell our story in the local media market. And they don't want to hear from me, they want to hear from you, from the local business owners. And we know from our research that 60% of travelers think that traveling is going to be more complicated in the future. And as solution providers, that's where you fill in that gap, and you help uncomplicate what the travel system will be like. So we're hoping that you can learn how to engage with your local media to share this story and to talk about the role that you play in travel planning and the value that you provide, and why it's important to shop small for travel. That's something that I've been talking a lot about with the consumer media, and it's getting really sticky. It's a lot of pickup. A lot of people are really interested in what it means to dream big for your next vacation, but shop small feel when it's time to book and to support a local business. So it's really resonating in the conversations that I've been having with the consumer media. And I think it's a perfect time for our travel advisors to engage with their local media market and kind of talk about the same thing. And so we'll be doing some more trainings and providing talking points on that in the next few days in our ASTA member lounge. So I want to also turn to some questions because we're getting a lot of questions in. So please keep them coming. We're going to start tackling some of them. And one of the questions that we just got is about talking points for lawmakers. So April asks, are there specific talking points available for when we call our legislators? So Eben, I'll let you talk about that.
Yes, I assume April's talking about when hopefully she joins us for Legislative Day. The short answer is yes, you will have more talking points than you can handle. So we're going to do, we always do at least one training session online before the event. We do training in person when you're at the event. And for those who have been there before, they'll tell you that your folder is there's lots of information in there. So there's little index cards with kind of short version talking points, and then we have longer talking points, and we have background documents. So yes, you will be well prepared. I don't know if anybody wants to put in the comments whether they, hopefully that you felt prepared during Legislative Day, but yes, talking points will be provided.
And just really quickly as well, Eben, to dovetail that, anytime we ask you to go to the ASTA portal, we definitely prepare you in that way too, with the right kind of talking points. And you can obviously, personalize the message to you and your business. But yeah, we definitely never leave you out there hanging alone. The other thing I wanted to just say quickly, Erica, is that Mo Nubani took your course. He's been on camera. I think he's been on camera several times since he took the. Yeah, he's done such great work, and I saw him talking about the domestic COVID testing requirement, and he did such a beautiful job at the airport near his home the other day on his local television station. So take the course and then get out there, and you can actually you can really affect change, and you can put a really fine point on your business, and you can do great things for our industry as well by helping magnify that megaphone for on the local level that we're trying to manage in the national level as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we all take part in this, I gotta say, anytime something happens in the travel industry that makes national news, I call it newsjacking. If you jump on that and reach out to your local media as an expert, because you're all travel experts, and just let the producer know. You can even call the news desk. A lot of times they'll just answer and say, hey, I'm a travel expert. I'm a local business owner. If you ever need someone to talk about anything travel related or how it might impact the industry or travelers planning or anything like that, I'm your person. It works. And we've had a lot of success with that. And it really does help complement the advocacy efforts that we're doing in government affairs. So going to some of the questions, we have quite a few. And one that I think is really great is from a member who just joined, and she wants to know, for those who have not gotten involved but are members, what would be the easiest, quickest first step to get involved?
Zane, I can take that. So asta.org/advocacy is probably the first place to start in terms of what the issues we're working on, how to find your elected officials, et cetera. But I would also say too, encourage you to get involved with your local ASTA chapter. We have a number across the country. It's really, we do a lot from headquarters. We can do a lot from headquarters, but it's really helpful, and we do have this, have local communities in every state and metropolitan area that are active, that are paying attention, especially when we're talking about state and local policy issues, which can be a little hard to follow sometimes from Washington, D.C. So on our website, you can quite easily find your local chapter. Encourage you to get engaged there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So we don't have a lot of time, but we do have a lot of questions. So I just want to let everyone know that if you're a member, you can ask questions directly to our team at asta.org/COVID-19 member. And there are a lot of resources there, from how to apply for loans to waivers that our general counsel has put together. Just so much information there for you. And we also have a portal where you can ask questions specifically to Eben and his team. So don't forget that's available for all of you. But one question that we have, Eben, Jennifer Hardy wants to know if there is an update about the executive order for quarantine with international travel.
So the CDC, God bless them, we'll segment CDC issues into what they've done and what they might do. I think what she's referring to is what they might do, something like what Canada does in terms of people coming back into the country, not just have to have a negative test, but have to be quarantined at a hotel, government-approved hotel for, I don't know exactly how long, 7 or 10 days at their own expense. I have not heard any updates about that. The CDC is kind of a black box. It's not like Congress. It's not accessible. It's not visible. But I will say on his second day, President Biden put out an executive order related to travel. And one of the things that CDC is supposed to look at is look at alternatives to this international testing order that would reduce the chances of Americans being stranded abroad and being sick abroad, which is even worse. So they're supposed to be looking at all of this. I have not heard any updates. Usually, if something like this is coming, it gets telegraphed, and you can pick up on it. For example, before they did the international testing rule, probably 3 weeks before that, we kind of started to hear that this might be coming. So that's a long way to say I do not have an update, but we're watching them closely.
Great. And one additional question that we have, Eben, that perhaps you can tackle. What is ASTA doing about the Canadian cruise ban, and can the Jones Act be overturned?
Interesting. Technically, this is the PVSA, the Passenger Vessel Services Act. I have a friend who works in the maritime industry, a close friend who emailed me about an hour ago and said, can you help? They support the Jones Act, which is related to cargo shipping as opposed to passenger ships. He said, can you please help to minimize confusion about these two things? So it's not the Jones Act, it's the PVSA, which has been in place since 1886, I want to say. So what this has to do with is Canada has closed its ports until February of 2022. Typically, if you're going on a cruise from, let's say, Seattle to Alaska, because those ships are not US built, you have to stop in a foreign port, and that's usually in Canada, and that's how the whole Alaska cruise season works. So with Canada closing their port, that puts the entire Alaska cruise season at risk. I will note that CDC hasn't even given the green light on our side for cruising to resume. So yes, we're aware of this, very concerned about this. Obviously, we have been working with the Alaska Congressional Delegation, which is also very concerned about this, and other travel industry associations to try to find a resolution. I will say, just given the way things are, it would be hard to repeal the Passenger Vessel Services Act. We're hopeful that some workarounds can be found, whether it's a limited waiver or whether it's, frankly, the Canadians may be backing down in terms of once the pandemic is under control and once vaccinations have ramped up to a sufficient level that we can do this. But this is among the many things that we're working on, but we're absolutely on it.
Great. And we're just getting ready to close out. We ran a little bit over because this was such a great discussion. So Zane, I want to turn to you for some closing comments, and perhaps you can talk a little bit about why now is a time to be a part of your ASTA community.
Well, thanks, Erica, and thank everyone again for participating today. And the reason is simple to belong to ASTA, and that's because the work that ASTA takes up is in response to issues that face the travel advisor. Whether you sell $100,000 of travel or $10,000 of travel a year, or 20 million or $20 billion of travel a year, it doesn't matter what if you are in the business of dispensing travel advice or selling travel, ASTA is here for you. And the work that we do is, how we sift and prioritize our work here at headquarters is in direct response to the feedback we get from members, to the understanding that we have of the business and the challenges that you face. I'll just give you a quick example. When we surveyed members recently about the challenges that they're facing and the challenges that the international testing regime abroad would create, and they said, is our government really going to hold people who are sick outside of the country without the ability to come back and get treated? Is our country really going to take a virus that is a 2% mortality rate and keep those people on foreign soil to try to manage that country's healthcare and testing systems by themselves? And when we're able to gather all this information, this wonderful insight from our members, and put those into cogent arguments to lawmakers, to media, that is the power. That's the magic of ASTA. Is when we all work together, we get organized and we take persuasive arguments to the right places in media and government. We can affect change. We can affect change for each other and for our entire industry. So that's the reason to belong. And I'm so proud and so happy to be a part of ASTA, but not only to lead the staff here, but work with our wonderful board of directors, who's so ably led by our chairman, Dave Hirschberger, and everyone on the board just gives so much time and talent and energy to the cause. I've never seen a more unified board. I've never seen a more unified organization than we have right now. And I'm sad that it's taken the pandemic to do that, but I am really grateful that we have real strengths here. And the more that we can work together, the better off our industry is going to be. So, thanks.
Well said. Thank you, Zane. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I see that there are still some questions in the comments, so I encourage you to go to the member portal and put those questions in that portal on asta.org/COVID-19 member, and we'll make sure that a member of our team gets back to you. And this will be available for viewing at a later time on our Facebook page, and we're also going to email it out to members. And for now, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. This was a great discussion. Thank you, Zane, for participating. We're going to be doing more of this because it's fun to engage with all of you. And Zane, if you could see the comments, I mean, it's just really wonderful to see how many people are interested in getting involved with ASTA and supporting our efforts. And we thank all of you for being a part of this with us. So for now, that's it from my end. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Eben. See you.